Welcome to the Value of Recruitment podcast with me, John Brooks. Sponsored by Atlas, the recruitment platform helping you become an AI-powered recruiter. This week, I'm joined by Vicky Short, former CEO of Randstad UK and Ireland, and now an advisor to recruitment leaders. Vicky talks about the shift to winning more interesting work and how recruiters can add value by acting as consultants to their clients. We talk about how to stand out by truly specialising in your market and the challenges of saying no to work that doesn't fit your strategy. Vicky also explains how recruitment leaders need to be a magnet, attracting clients, candidates, and consultants in order to build a high-value business. Enjoy the show. I hope you find it valuable. Vicky, thanks for joining us.
Oh, it's great, John. Thanks for asking me to join you today.
Well, I know you've got loads of experience, so we want to dive into that and get your opinions, advice. And we were just talking off air about your crystal ball gazing abilities. So let's see what we can predict and what we can find out. Let's kick off with the big question. In your eyes, how valuable is recruitment?
It is a big question, actually, John. And I think, recruitment is, I think, becoming more valuable, but only where it moves up the value chain. If you think about talent and recruitment, it's one of the most critical functions for any business. Hiring and retaining the right talent in a company underpins any business success. And I think as recruiters, and I still consider myself a recruiter after 28 years, and it's a long time since I did the recruitment consultant job, but I think quite often we really forget that. I think we can be in those negotiations with clients, or we're getting pushed down on price, particularly in a climate like we are at the moment. But recruitment is absolutely critical for organisations. And I think as recruiters now, particularly with more of the process being automated, more AI in the process, the sort of human in the process becomes more critical. And I think it's a pivotal point for the sector at the moment where there's a real opportunity for recruiters to become more valuable and valued by their clients, but only by stepping into a place where they're not doing what they've always done. Because what they've always done is becoming more automated. AI is taking a lot of that transactional side away. And also organisations' internal talent teams are becoming more sophisticated. And I'm seeing some really great best practice there as well. So it's incredibly valuable. And I think this sort of pivotal point where we are now, there's a real opportunity for recruiters to have more interesting work because they're going to be able to have the space and time to really get to know their clients more intimately than they ever have done, and their talent, the candidates that they're placing, more than they ever have done. And I think that's super exciting. A lot of people are scared to death by it. But what an amazing place to be where your admin's gone away, your shortlisting, having to work really hard on finding talent. That is the heavy lifting there is done for you. So you're there able to have great conversations with the candidates and with the clients, not feeling under pressure on the time on it. So yeah, I think it's super exciting at the minute. And I think with that, that's where you can really prove your value, because you're able to, when you're talking to the candidate or you're talking to the client, you're really showing deeper insight. You're able to have the time to ask great questions and move the conversation forward from a transactional conversation, which is what a lot of recruiters spend their time on at the moment.
Yeah, I love that phrase, interesting work. Yeah.
Yeah.
At least theoretically, who wouldn't want that? You don't want to go to work. Well, I think you were kind of skirting around this point. It's sorts the wheat from the chaff. Like, the better people will be more enabled by this and get the more interesting work and be able to do more interesting things with it. Yeah, there's a theory that, so we've both been in the recruitment industry a long time. Yeah, as LinkedIn came in and things like that, it was almost like a lot of recruiters were offering clients, oh, we'll run your LinkedIn for you. We'll in effect do the tech admin for you. And as you say, we can drop a lot of that and take the more interesting stuff, but you've got to be good. Like, there are less hiding places. It's not, right, follow this script or press these buttons. It is get to the bottom of your client's problems.
Yeah.
Which is scary.
It is.
If
It's
you've
also
not been doing.
thing, and I think you're right. I did skirt around it. It's something that I think about and get excited about the possibilities for, people entering the recruitment market or who are already really skilled in the recruitment market now. But also the flip side of what's going to happen to people who that's really outside their comfort zone. So, I think there's a sort of two-dimensional thing here where, those of us that have been in recruitment who are, they love talking to people, they're curious about organizations, they're sort of on the customer service sales angle of recruitment. There's a real opportunity to hone those skills and thrive and really demonstrate how you can drive real value for an organization by providing those insights and asking deeper questions and so on. But what about those people who aren't? Because there's a lot of people who are great in recruitment at the moment who are perhaps a bit more introvert, who are perhaps a bit more, have hidden behind the keyboard over the last few years where, it's been, you've had to do a lot of work on LinkedIn or job boards or whatever, but become a bit more keyboard warriors. Well, how do we support those people in this transition and what's going to happen to the work that they're doing? Can they make that leap or will there need to be will they become the people behind the data and driving the insights for the other recruiters to take those insights to clients maybe? Because there's not everybody's made for that sort of front end customer facing role in recruitment.
Yeah, absolutely. A trend I'm seeing, I've worked with a few recruitment leaders recently who I think don't fit the classic stereotype. They're not. I mean, they're still people, but they have described themselves as introverts.
Yeah.
But this is a great time for them because they are leading their businesses, but because they're experts in recruitment, including the process, and they're spotting the opportunities with AI. They're able to marry that together, and I like the idea that people even lower down in the organization can say, well, hang on, there's a lot of data here and AI can gather that data and bring that data together, but actually add the human cherry on top.
Yeah.
The real added value that then backs up the outgoing people who are consulting. So yeah, I hope there is room for everyone in this.
Yeah, I think you're right. And I think that sort of, AI can gather the data and indeed give you some insights, but you do need the human eye on it to make sense of if it's a hallucination or not. Is it, have we indeed as an organization given it the right data sets to look at and so on. So I think there's some really great new roles for people that are evolving. I think that's where recruitment will come into its own because we'll have those really great insights to be able to share with our clients where, some organizations are already there and have been for years, but let's face facts, some organizations have been flying by the seat of the pants and perhaps haven't had that insight. And I think that's going to be much more accessible to recruiters in general.
Yeah. Something you mentioned earlier, you said some internal recruitment teams are creating some really good best practice. You don't need to name names, but can you share some examples of what that looks like? And importantly, how do good recruitment agents plug into that? How do we add value to good, interesting internal recruitment teams?
I think if you look at the way internal talent teams have evolved, many years ago, and let's face facts, some recruiters saw it as, if you can't make it in recruitment, you go and work in internal talent. And, that's the sort of elephant in the room. And that's no longer the case. And I think some organizations where the internal talent teams have really good, strong leadership, they have better tech stacks. I mean, they have access to all the tech stacks recruiters have got. LinkedIn, the job boards. Should you need job boards these days? They've got. If you look at some of the ATSs and CRMs and Workday, etc., they've got the technology there at their fingertips to be able to do this, and have hired better people over the years, so that And a lot of them are now have better tech stacks than some companies. So I think as always, there's a whole range of in between there. But I met with an ex-colleague a few weeks ago who's run some big global ITA teams and gone in and sort of either helped set them up or turn them around when they weren't doing so well. And we were having a conversation about this, and he was saying that, recruiters now have to really step it up, because you can't assume that the ITA team's going to be average, because quite often they're pretty good. And where is the opportunity for recruiters? Well, I suppose it's understanding. Well, one, showing some respect.
True.
Two, really understanding. Well, what are they trying to achieve with that internal talent team? So, where does it sit in the organisation? What is the setup? How are they KPI'd? What are they focusing on? Because they quite often won't be trying to do everything. Some of them are focused on the volume roles. Some of them are focused on sort of niche roles, and they can quite often be in larger enterprise organizations set up in different segments. And understanding, that where's the gap and how can I fit into that gap and where can I add value? But also not feeling like they're in competition with the internal talent teams. It's about being in partnership, and how can you make them look good to their boss and seeing them as the customer rather than a competitor.
Hmm.
Think of many conversations I've had with teams where, well, we can't get through the ITA, and they've not taken the time to really understand what they're really doing, what they're trying to achieve, how they're being measured, what their pain points are, how they choose to partner with recruiters, and then coming in from that might not be working for you because of, and being a more advisor to them and helping them solution that. There's big opportunity there still. And I think, quite often recruiters will see it as a competitor or just see it as a barrier and a challenge rather than a real opportunity to think, well, they're doing that really well. I'm great at this. I can really support that team to be even more successful by being a proper recruitment partner.
Yeah, I was working with someone recently who is ex-internal talent. And so she really knows their challenges and their strategic decisions. What do we do and what do we not do?
Yes.
So she's running an agency. She's been able to say, hang on, we can really create services that meet the different needs.
Yes.
So as you say, they might, an internal team might say, right, we're going to focus on 80%, the 80% roles, the core, and not do the specialist roles. Or we're going to focus on these specialist roles, but outsource the senior roles or whatever. And I guess, yes, the mindset shift from, if you treat someone as a competitor, you won't do like a customer analysis of them. You'll do a competitor analysis of them. But if you say, hang on, if you can shift that mindset and say, hang on, this is a potential customer, what do they value? Then you can serve them.
I think so. And I think the other thing there as well is, if you think of one of the real benefits you bring as an external recruiter to that partnership is, the internal talent teams are recruiting for their brand. And like you say, quite often they're recruiting the 80% roles. So how, as a recruiter, are you bringing the external market, what's happening in that external market, and what are their competitors doing that client might benefit from, the insight you can bring as a recruiter, that because they're so embedded in their own organization, so on, they're not seeing that. And again, I think that's where there's an opportunity for recruiters. Now, some internal talent teams are great at having that network and having that outside in perspective, but there's quite a lot of them that just don't have the space or time or network to be able to do that. So I think, again, where you can support them by giving them those nuggets and that outside in insights, that builds that partnership even deeper.
Yeah. I think just a practical idea is, rather than going to TA, if you've got to the point where you want to talk to them, rather than saying, do you work with agencies? Actually saying, what's your strategy? What are you, as you say, what are your KPIs? What are you focused on? And what aren't you focused on? And then if there's that synergy of saying, oh, hang on, you're not focused on this. Well, I'm really good at that. Then that brings you together. Rather than butting up against, well, can I have as many jobs from you as possible? And they say, well, actually, our aim is to fill as many jobs as possible internally.
Yeah.
Interesting. One thing I'm fascinated by is how recruiters stand out from other agencies.
Mm.
There are, as we know, so many agencies out there, and I get a bit depressed when people say, oh, aren't we all the same? It's fine when clients say it. We can work on that. But when recruiters say, oh, aren't we all the same? Now, obviously, for a long time, you ran teams and then countries for Randstad. Now, that's a big brand, but it's also a big organization. How did you define who you were and make sure you stood out?
That's a very big question. I suppose, over the years we evolved, and that's part of how you stand out is by continuing to evolve with the market. As an organization, you can't stand still. And, if you look at the labor market, the recruitment market, the economy, it's changes so much. So as a recruiter, you've got to be constantly aware of how that's evolving and what the customer needs are, how that's impacting customer needs and evolving with it. But so at Randstad, we really focused on, how do we, whilst being a big company, how do we be a specialist within that? And I think recruiters stand out by understanding their clients' market, their clients' organization and culture and values, and then really trying to align as closely as they can do with that. And I suppose you can look at it through a number of lenses, industry sectors, but you can also look at it through talent types as well. So clients these days, being a specialist, I think is just it's a basic level. They want you to be a specialist, understand them, the sector they operate and the type of talent that they're looking for. But then there's also what's the service that the customer's looking for. So you've got to look at, am I seen as a specialist, particularly for larger organisations like Randstad, as a managed service provider, as an RPO partner, as an advisor, not just temp or perm. So I think, we chose the industry sectors where we wanted to play, and
Yeah.
we chose the types of services we wanted to offer our clients based on what was happening and where we saw the growth, but also based on what we were good at. There were certain areas in the market that we knew were going to grow, but we just didn't have in our portfolio. And actually to do well there, we knew that would need to be a startup or an acquisition strategy. So we chose to focus on, where can we be great and do a great job for our customers. And by really focusing in each of the speciality divisions that the company had on trying to be as close to that client and meeting them and the talent where they were, I think that's how we stood out. So whether that was in our healthcare business or our education business or our manufacturing division or finance business, you've got to meet the client where they are and want to deeply care about it, but have insight. Do you really understand what the challenges are that they're facing? And you look at what's happening at the moment in the economy and so on. Each industry sector is going to have different challenges based on what's happening in the Middle East, based on what's happening in the labour market, and as a recruiter, you've got to be able to bring that to your client, or they don't see the value in having you, because it is so crowded. There's so many recruiters there, and I've seen that. I knew it when I was in Randstad, but I've seen it even more now I'm not in Randstad, that there are some phenomenal recruitment businesses in the UK and Ireland, and the ones that are doing well when the market's tough are deeply specialist and really close to their clients and really care about delivering a great service to their clients. And
Yeah.
I see that consistently, and I think that's hugely exciting. But I think there's a lot of recruiters that are struggling to find that. But you look at the ones that are doing well, and they're all really clear on who they are and how they bring that value to their customers.
Yeah. And it's wonderfully put, really hard to do.
Yeah.
It reminds me of, the definition of strategy is what you don't do, right?
Yes.
How can you share any examples of, to me, I feel that's a really challenging thing to do.
Yeah.
I'm guessing you had times where it was difficult to say no to an opportunity because it fell outside of the strategy, but
Yeah.
there's opportunity there.
Well, I remember not long after being appointed into the chief executive role, we did a big review of our strategy because we were wanting to think, right, how do we grow the business, but also at the same time, how do we improve our profitability? And we did a big review of the market and outside in. That was the market, as in which industry sectors are going to grow and which job types are going to grow in the next 10 years. We looked at all of our competitors, so, the top 20 players in the UK. And then we looked at our internal portfolio and did a total review on that and made some decisions that there were certain parts of our portfolio we were just not going to continue with because we looked at it through is it going to grow? Are we good at it? And can we become a top 5 player in that space? And if it didn't meet those criteria, that was a decision we made. Then we took that out into the business, and that clarity helped us make choices on, where we put our marketing dollars, where we put our headcount investment, where we put our training, and so on. And like you say, when opportunities came in, because we were lucky enough to have business that came in for tender, we would look at that lens of, can we do a great job for this client, and does it fit into sort of our portfolio mix in terms of industry sector, talent type and service solution that we wanted to sell. And that did disappoint some people. And it did mean that we went to some parts of the organization and said, we're either going to exit or wind down, offer those people opportunities to move into growth segments. And that's tough, but it also creates clarity and assurance for people and certainty for people. And I think once people saw that was paying off and where we were putting our bets on growth was paying off, that gave more confidence in the strategy.
Yeah, and you just mentioned the word confidence. Something you said there made me think it also gives you more confidence in your value. So if you said, we are going to be a top 5 player, then that means that any new business you're going for, you're saying we're going for this because we are one of the top 5 people, ideally top 3, top 2, top 1. To win this. So, whoever in the team everyone in the team who's going for that says, we have the right to win this and our clients should choose us because we are one of the best for this opportunity. Not that this is just another random opportunity. Wouldn't it be nice to win some of them?
You say that feeling of being, people want to feel successful. They want to feel valued, both internally and by their clients and by the talent. And I think that clarity on, you want to be a magnet as a recruiter. I think you sort of, but if you think of it as a magnet, you're the recruitment business. You want to attract the best recruitment consultants. You want to attract the best employer brands, and you want to attract the best talent for those employer brands. And the clearer you can be, I think your magnet becomes stronger, and it becomes a bit of a flywheel of success. But that's hard. I think it's hard to, like you say, it's hard to say no because you don't want to disappoint people. But the more you can show them that the no's lead you, I think there's a book called Getting to Yes. The more no's it gets you closer to the yes.
Yeah.
It does give that clarity and assurance and the confidence that we're doing this because we want you to be successful and we want the business to be successful.
Yeah. I love that magnet analogy. I'm trying to go further with it, but I'm not an expert in magnets. So I was thinking of someone. Yeah. I'll ask my daughter. Someone waving a magnet around hoping they attract something versus actually pointing it in the right direction and turning it up. I don't know. There's something there, I think. Recruiters are often seen as all the same. Yeah, in my experience, there are a lot of agencies, often specialists, who add different things. Yeah, they might call it added value or additional services, things like that. Sometimes that's kind of the catalyst is the client asking for it. Sometimes it's because the the agency leader says, well, I'm also fascinated in this, and they bring their interest in to drive that, be it a kind of psychometrics or whatever. Can you give us examples of things that Randstad or the agencies you now work with and coach, things that the added value that they're bringing to their clients?
I think if you look at the market, there's some, like you say, some of this has been driven out of necessity or client need, or indeed, I think, as the market's evolving. And I think now, I suppose when I started in recruitment, it was largely temp or perm. And then you had MSPs, RPO, neutral vend. And then you started to get some SOW, which largely started, I guess, tech recruiters, would get an SOW, but then it evolved into, you get SOW in all different sorts of spaces, particularly if you're running a program now, you're asked to look at that, but also, looking at in public sector and so on. So it's evolved over the years. And I think this is what's one thing that I find brilliant about recruitment. It's so resilient. But I see a trend now moving to more advisory services, and not just in the big recruiters, in the, I suppose, the smaller and more medium-sized recruiters, where I think some of it's been driven out of we need to improve our margin, because as much as people in the UK thought that the margins had sort of hit a floor, I think they've come under pressure again in the last couple of years, where it's becoming more highly procured again. So there's a need to where your costs are increasing on your headcount, and your tech costs, your tech stack costs are going up, and so on. How do we make our business viable and more profitable? Organizations are, in the wonderful way that recruiters are entrepreneurial, are looking at ways to enhance that, but actually realizing as well that there's a space to offer advisory services and clients pay for it. And I suppose in an organization like Randstad, we have the benefit of working with the likes of McKinsey and so on, where you see what they're doing and how they're selling and how they're operating. And they're not selling widgets or an hourly rate or a placement fee or whatever. They're selling to the C-suite, and they're working on strategy. They're working on business growth. They're not thinking, well, I'll place a person in for a day and that's how I'm making my money. And I think there's opportunities there, and more recruiters are seeing that. Well, I'm embedded in the talent of the organization anyway, but actually I need to move up the value chain to get more of the wallet share, be stickier with my client, really understand their business strategy, and starting to add some of those services to their clients. So some of that is more advanced, and actually moving into a space where some recruiters are competing with the McKinseys, Accentures of this world, or some of the tech service providers, and some on a lighter touch where they might be advising on a recruitment process or employer branding or those sorts of things. So there's a whole scale of that, but I'm seeing that much more again. Now I'm in the outside world. I'm seeing more and more recruiters in that space, and more of their revenue coming from that. I met with a lady the other week, and she's got a £10 million recruitment business, and 40% of her revenue is coming from advisory now, where she wasn't even doing that 3 years ago. So I think there is opportunity for organizations, but it depends on your own skill set and the customers, and it usually starts with a necessity.
Everyone is talking about AI-powered recruiters, but what does that actually look like? With Atlas as your CRM, it means every interaction with your candidate is automatically captured and searchable. If they mention their salary in an email, it's instantly recorded without you having to write anything. And behind the scenes, Atlas discovers every company that a candidate has worked for, the industries those companies operate in, as well as things like company size and description. All this means you can do your job much faster and add more value to your clients. To learn more about Atlas, go to recruitwithatlas.com. No matter where you want to end up and what type of services you want to offer, the way in is to ask bigger questions.
Yes.
So if you're saying, do you need someone? Your finance manager's just left, do you need a new finance manager? You're staying in recruitment. There's nothing to that.
Absolutely.
But you can't price or then negotiate on the real pain point and the real need there. Whereas if you ask deeper questions and they say, well, actually, we're aiming for an exit in 3 years, if we're talking about, and our finance function needs to have these skills in it in order to get that exit, and that exit is worth $100 million. Okay, we're getting somewhere.
Yes.
Now, on its own, that allows you to justify your placement fee more effectively. But what I've seen time and again is what you just said is it then opens up questions that you find you can answer.
Mm.
If you've been in recruitment, if you've been in that sector, if you are a specialist, you say, oh, well, actually, I worked with someone 2 years ago who went through this process. They hired a few people, some of them worked out, some of them didn't. That is incredibly valuable information. And the prize we're talking about is $100 million. So it's not just a 15K placement fee is a lot of money. It's suddenly like, hang on.
Yeah.
I'll happily pay you if you give me the answer to unlocking $100 million or whatever the big picture is.
And you're right there, John. I think that, that's the critical thing that I think a lot of recruiters forget is we're not just finding the person to work in finance. It's about really understanding what are the skills that organization needs to achieve the exit or the business growth or whatever their strategy is, and what's the gap at the moment, and what's the next critical hire or critical 3 hires that are going to help them fill those gaps, rather than I need a finance bod. Quite often recruiters get stuck on the job description rather than really understanding the strategy and the skills that are required. And if you look at now, how many, can't remember the stats, but it's something like 70% of roles are going to need to be reskilled in the next 2 years. Well, if that's the reality, what are the skills of the future that client's going to need? It's not what they have in the business now. What are they going to need? And whether that's, the over-talked thing of AI skills, or what do you mean by that? But actually, by bringing AI into the organization, that puts more criticality onto the other. So I think there's a real conversation there where, like you say, if you ask bigger questions, it's really going to support you as a recruiter to, one, justify your fee, but potentially open up other opportunity to sell more advisory services to clients, particularly linked to big business outcomes like 100 million exit, for example.
Yeah. And then that opens up, I mean, I think we've all been there, clients who say, wow, yeah, I didn't realize. Let's hire 2 senior finance managers, or great, let's bring in a data person to the finance team. I think we spend a lot of time, or we've had a lot of experience as recruiters in a zero-sum fight with clients.
Mm.
And actually, we need to remember that we can have times where we get to sit on the same side of the board table as the client and help them plan things and help them build things.
Yeah.
And that leads to incredible
It
outcomes.
does. And I think as well with that, John, I think there's also if you think you're I don't know, say you're hiring that mid-level finance role, and that's all you do as a recruiter, you're speaking to many more organizations hiring those sorts of people, and you're speaking to many more candidates than that client will speak to. So your ability to advise and give real insight as to how those roles are evolving and what are the real skills that our organizations are looking for. So it's not just, well, that's what I think I need. Well, it's, well, have you thought about these other things? And that's where you bring the insight and guidance. There's a real opportunity for recruiters there as well that I think is often overlooked.
Yeah. As you say, it's a skill. We don't talk about it so much on the day-to-day, but yeah, recruiters generally are very adaptable. They evolve quickly. So I think we can, if we recognize that skill set that we have, that allows us to then say, well, hang on, let's find ways to get in the room.
Absolutely.
And let's talk strategy And when we pick up that information, we can then evolve with that.
Mm.
I'm a big believer that recruitment is a professional service. It's not, the black sheep of professional services or business services. It should be up there with, I know we're not the same as McKinsey, but I think we can add as much value as McKinsey some of the time. Sometimes McKinsey doesn't add much value, but I'm not going to go into that.
Another debate.
Another day. Yes, a non-public discussion. But if we can get ourselves in the room, we can create those professional services. And I think you said earlier, the margins can be much, much higher on that. And we can tie it to much bigger value.
Yeah. And I think as well, coming back to a point we discussed earlier, John, is, as the tech stacks in recruiters are improving, the access to better data, overlaying of AI across that data, we get much deeper insights that are factual than we've had before. And I think that there's real power in that as well. And coming back to what we said earlier as well, the fact that we're going to have more time, or recruiters are going to have more time to have these great conversations with clients rather than the sort of transactional work that they were doing, I think is, that's where it becomes very exciting as a role in the future.
Yeah, I've got a theory that one way of adding value is just almost selling our obsession. And what I mean by that is AI just generally allows everyone to access everything.
Mm-hmm.
So you can go to any of the AI tools and say, get me a report on this. You could pretty much say, get me a salary survey on this or salary report on this. But people don't know what to ask for. If you're running a business of any size, you're not only thinking about recruitment, you're thinking about your finance function, marketing, sales, manufacturing, product, whatever. Well, no, everything, not whatever, absolutely everything. So you don't have the time to think, oh, hang on, I could really get some insights into this. And then you've got the hallucinations or the asking the right questions or the challenges that come with AI. So in a sense, as specialists and experts, what we're able to do is just say, even if this is public information, and we should have proprietary information as well, but we can really dive into an obsessive level and say, wow, I just keep asking more and more questions and more of the right questions of this data and interrogating it in the right way, and then tying it to your specific business as a client. And here are the answers. It's almost like they're outsourcing the thinking, but it's thinking that they're not able to do themselves. The danger is we would say, oh, anyone could ask this question. And my answer is no, they couldn't. It's too overwhelming there's too many possible questions to ask to actually ask the right ones specifically of recruitment.
Yeah. And I think you're right. A lot of it, I love AI and I use it all the time, but it only takes you so deep. And, depending on the data sets it has access to, it will only, particularly on things like that, it can be quite out of date and very generic. Now that will get richer over time. And if you're a Randstad or an Adecco or whatever, overlaying that across millions of data points, you're going to get much richer data than you would if, you were doing it through an open access AI. But it's the curiosity and the specificity of those sorts of queries that are going to drive the value.
Yeah. So I think there is that role for the specialist expert still, even despite that. I'm intrigued. I mean, I'm interested in all of this, but where you are and where you've come from, obviously you've got this, can I compare you to an AI? I'm not sure. You've got this huge data set of your experience and you're now coaching recruitment leaders. You've got so much you could offer. What do you focus on? What do you specifically focus on? Because you've covered everything, I imagine, in your time at Randstad and other places. So what do you think is most important or most valuable to recruitment leaders that you say, right, this is what we focus on. This is what we take out of everything I know?
Well, I don't tell them what we're going to focus on. They bring what they want. Depending on what they're working on at the moment, I've coached somebody through their first acquisition, which was really interesting to do that with somebody. I've coaching somebody who has just been promoted into their first board level role. I'm coaching a number of people who want to become a board level leader. So they're at that sort of MD level, but want to become a C-suite. And the consistency throughout is, I suppose there's a few themes. I need to have this conversation with somebody, or I need to approach this issue with somebody, and I really want the space to chat that through and talk that through and how I approach it, because I want to do it in the right way. I want to get the right outcome, or I want to treat that person with respect, or whatever. I've got this challenge and I want to chat it through with you, or want to chat it through in a safe space where I'm not getting judged or my career doesn't depend on it, because there's the further, the more senior you get, the lonelier it is, and particularly if you're the CEO, you've no peer group, you've no natural peer group to chat stuff through with. So it can be a really lonely space for people. I've really enjoyed and really valued having that opportunity to be the safe space for people. And sometimes they do want, my insight and experience of what I've done. But more often they come up with the answer themselves. They just need the space for someone to hold with them to talk things through. And I feel really privileged that I'm able to do that now and give back to the industry in a way where I'm helping people in the big jobs at a time where it is tough out there and it is changing really quickly, and they're not sure how to approach some of these big questions that they've got to ask themselves, and I'm able to help them and be there for them. And I think that's a really privileged place to be.
You're right. It does feel overwhelming, doesn't it? The number of decisions, and I think the speed of decision making that you need to have, or it feels like you need to have, just keeps ratcheting up.
Yeah.
Nice. Well, thank you for giving back to the industry. As you say, I don't know if I just didn't see it when I started in recruitment, but I feel like recruitment is more of a community.
Yes.
And there is more sharing and support than certainly I saw previously.
No, I think you're right there, John. I think there's more collaboration than I've ever seen, in a way where people recognise there's enough of the market out there for everybody to be successful. I think we're at a pivotal point again where will the market go? Where will the recruitment sector go? And what will be the jobs of the future? And that will look different by the parts of the market you're in and so on. But people want some help. They want some ideas. They want some, what are you doing about this? And they're really curious. And thank goodness there's people that are generous enough to be able to share their best practice with people in the industry for the benefit of the industry. And I think that's great to see that collaboration. And I think the sector will be stronger as a result of that.
Yeah. And we joked earlier about gazing into a crystal ball to make predictions. As we know, the game is not to make the right prediction. The game is to create the right strategy that will help you win and help your business grow and be able to evolve into what comes next.
Very much so. And I think I've always been a great believer, if you put the customer at the heart of your decision making, you can't go far wrong with that.
Well, that is a great point to end on. So thank you so much for sharing your expertise, insights, ideas, and so much more. Thanks again to Vicky for sharing her insights and expertise. 3 things stood out for me. First, recruiters' ability to adapt and evolve, and how that gives us an advantage in an ever-changing world. Second, Vicky's idea that recruitment leaders need to be a magnet, attracting the right people. And third, that the future of recruitment will lead us to more interesting work. If you found the show valuable, please leave a review and remember to subscribe or follow the show on your podcast app. You can also get more insights and inspiration by signing up to my added value emails on Substack. You can find the link in the show notes. Now, go create some value. Thank you to Atlas for sponsoring the Value of Recruitment podcast. To learn more about how Atlas is creating an AI platform that helps recruitment agencies generate more placements with less effort, visit recruitwithatlas.com.